This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Happy Friday. Time to look back at the week and make sense of the biggest local and statewide stories in our weekly news recap.
A new WBEZ Chicago Sun-Times poll is showing Democrats don't appear to be in danger of losing any of their statewide offices in Springfield.
Republican mega donor Richard Uihlein donating $13.9 million to Dan Proft's Super PAC.
For 25 years, ABC 7 political reporter Charles Thomas gave you the straight news. Now he's giving you real talk on the governor's race.
Another major utility company is now facing a criminal charge related to corruption allegations.
Here to dive deep into those headlines and more is WVON commentator and attorney Kimberly Egoin. Welcome back, Kimberly.
So great to be with you all.
Also with us is Dan Mihalopoulos, WBEZ investigative politics reporter. Good to see you, Dan.
My pleasure.
And WBEZ reporter Mike Puente is here. Hey, Mike.
Hey, how are you?
So we're going to start off with this morning's breaking news. AT&T has admitted to bribing an associate of former House Speaker Mike Madigan. What are the details, Dan?
So this is very similar to what happened a couple of years ago with Mike Madigan, where there was the accusation that ComEd had bribed Mike Madigan, and ComEd admitted that they hired a bunch of people to do little or nothing as consultants, Madigan allies, to win influence with Madigan and ultimately get legislation that was favorable to them. Legislation that, by the way, raised the rates of how much we pay for electricity in places like this and in our homes across northern Illinois. Now there's a new front, essentially, in the federal case against Madigan, where yet another massive company that relies on state regulators for a lot of things is admitting, and it's a much smaller fine, so I guess AT&T can say we're not as bad as ComEd, but it's $23 million compared to the $200 million fine that ComEd agreed to pay a couple years ago. But it adds another charge. It's a superseding indictment is what they call it. So Mike Madigan was already charged with corruption, but now he is charged with yet another situation where the feds say that his power in Springfield, which was almost absolute, they passed some legislation that favored AT&T. AT&T apparently had trouble getting it done before, but after they hired a former legislator, retired legislator, and helped him supplement his pension with a gig that involved no actual work, they got what they wanted in Springfield. At least that's the allegation. And we should add, Mike Madigan has denied everything up until now.
Yeah. Kimberly, your thoughts on this?
Well, it's interesting because now, of course, as Dan just said, a superseding charge. And I think so many people, of course, he's entitled to all of his days in court because they seem to be getting more extensive at this point. But so many are wondering, when are you finally going to get actual trials? When are you going to find? I mean, this is the same thing that we're thinking about with the indicted aldermen in the city of Chicago. You're not seeing many people actually go to trial so that we can try and put these things behind us. But then again, Dan, how do you put it behind you if you keep getting new charges?
Well, the wheels of justice move slowly. The statute of limitations on some of these things is like 5 years or something like that. So they want to make sure they have a case that is airtight. They want to make sure that they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And then you have guys like you mentioned, Ed Burke, is still an alderman, and Mike Madigan, who's left the legislature. And both of them have millions and millions of dollars in campaign funds that they can use legally in Illinois to defend themselves against corruption charges like this. And and that's what they're doing.
And that sums it up nicely from their point of view. But from the point of view of the people in the state of Illinois, city of Chicago, and all of these places, because if these charges are in fact true, that means a lot of policies were changed just to benefit very few, a lot of tax dollars, a lot of influence that took money out of the communities who really needed it. We're talking about rate hikes. We're talking about all the things that you don't want to see. So I think that they need to move a little faster so we can figure out whether this happened or not.
All right, let's shift over to the election. It's now less than a month away. A new Sun-Times WBEZ poll shows J.B. Pritzker has a double-digit lead over Darren Bailey. Dan, what did that poll show us?
I mean, it's shown us pretty much everything that we've seen in previous polls as well. It's 15-point lead for J.B. Pritzker. We know this is a predominantly blue state. There was a Republican governor relatively recently in Bruce Rauner, who was defeated by J.B. Pritzker in the last election. But definitely J.B. Pritzker wanted head-to-head matchup with Darren Bailey, because Darren Bailey was, maybe not the most far-right candidate in the primary, because there were a few of them, but he was far to the right of the candidate that the mainstream Republicans wanted. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is kind of a predictable outcome that we're veering toward. There doesn't seem to be any
surprises.
There doesn't seem to be any reason to think that suddenly the state has gone red and is going to elect a farmer from far, far away from the population centers of the state, a farmer who has called Chicago a hellhole. So I'm not even sure that he thinks that's a winning strategy, but he felt it needed to be said, and he's saying it.
Despite the polls showing Pritzker as the clear front runner, though, conservative mega donor Richard Uihlein is putting his money on another candidate. What's the latest, Dan?
So Dick Uihlein, what can we say about him? There's boxes probably at any place where you work, including our workplace, I believe, that come from this company, Uihlein, which moved just across the state line into Wisconsin. But he's from Lake Forest, and I believe the company was started originally in Illinois, and he's one of the biggest donors to Republican causes in the whole country. He's giving a lot of money to people who are election deniers all over the country, people who think that Donald Trump won the 2020 election for president, which he didn't, obviously. He has given a lot of money here locally now to try to get Darren Bailey elected as governor, and a lot of it goes through this PAC, People Who Play by the Rules PAC, which is run by a far-right operative and radio show host named Dan Proft, who apparently now lives in Florida.
$52 million. Uihlein has spent more than $52 million to back Darren Bailey. Anybody shocked by that amount of money? I'm looking at you, Kimberly.
Not at this point. Not at this point. It looks like you have to be a billionaire to win this seat, and you have to have access to a lot of funds. The one thing that I will say, I think that when we're talking about being an incumbent, of course, obviously, the governor has that advantage. He also has a record that he has to run on, and he's able to say, these are the things that I've done. For example, COVID-19. I protected you from COVID-19. That was a big one, right? But you are seeing Bailey, even if he doesn't feel like he really has a chance, you're seeing him chip away at some of the weaker spots, such as cannabis. It was supposed to be a social equity program. There still is not an African-American dispensary or grower or anything. That's a failure. There are other things that he's trying to point out, as well as using African-Americans in his ads to chip away, because African-Americans are the base of the party. So it's just really interesting still to watch those dynamics, even though, as Dan said, I don't know that it's going to make much of a mark considering the candidate Darren Bailey. But when the candidate gets hurts their own candidacy, hurts their own campaign by saying, Chicago is a hellhole, that doesn't help either. But I'm not surprised by these amounts of money. When you have a billionaire sitting already as governor, you got to fight back somehow and, try to fund your campaign somehow. But some of these numbers, though, are astronomical as to how, it talks about access to the higher ups, the all the way to the governor's office. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of influence, and it doesn't bode well. What is it? How does that help the constituency? How does it help the everyday people? Great point.
Well, this is all relative, though. $50 million compared to the record $171 million that JB spent in 2020, and he's worth, I think, by most estimates, $3-4 billion. So,
wow.
It's like $20 to me.
We mentioned Dan Proft not that long ago, his conservative People Who Play by the Rules PAC, which Dan Michalopoulos told us about, has a new campaign ad that is surprising a lot of journalists. Let's listen to this.
For 25 years, ABC 7 political reporter Charles Thomas gave you the straight news. Now, he's giving you real talk on the governor's race.
Darren Bailey, I met the man. He's a family farmer, somebody who understands what it's like to go to work every day, somebody who's fair-minded. I could trust this guy.
Yeah, this ran during the Bears game last night, I hear. Political reporter Charles Thomas retired from ABC 7 back in 2017. It's been reported he received $50,000 to do this ad. I want to go around the table because I'm already seeing some smirks. I want to get everyone's thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Miss Kimberly.
Well, It was shocking. And to me, as we've been saying on our station, the quality of the commercial, Justin, let's forget about the fact that he was a 25-year journalist and that is what he put on the line, for this. I guess he is officially done with being a journalist. But the quality of the commercial, it was almost like a Saturday Night Live commercial. I was looking for the laugh track.
It looked like a spoof.
Yes. And then the second one comes out and I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a little bit more substance to it. And then at the end, he turns and looks at us like he's an actor. So I'm just confused about, there's a lot of money being spent. I'm just not quite sure what they were trying to gain by that, because there's he doesn't really say anything about Darren Bailey, his policies. He just says he's a farmer. We all know he's a farmer now.
What do you think, Dan?
CT, if you're listening, what are you doing? No, seriously. I as a guy I looked up to, he went to Mizzou, J school, like I did, and they certainly.
So you were super disappointed.
I don't know if that's the word I would use. It's his life, and he's retired now, and they paid him $50,000. To do it, and there may be more where that's coming from as we look at the campaign finance reports. But when I first met him at City Hall as a reporter there in the press gallery, off to the side of the city council chambers, he once said to me, I'm the most intransigent reporter in Chicago, referring to himself.
Okay.
Although I might say that for myself as well. But no, seriously, he really saw himself as in the journalist side and not on the field. And if there's any bit of substance to this, look, one day I got a call at home that it was a robocall of a town hall meeting several weeks ago with Charles Thomas talking up Darren Bailey and saying this is the first time that he has felt that he can endorse a candidate and work for a candidate, is the way that he phrased it on that call. And the one bit of substance that I got from listening to about 25 minutes of that, and I don't think they knew I was listening. The one bit of substance was, he's saying, look, the Democratic Party has had power in Illinois for a long time. And what have they done for the African-American community? And his argument was he thinks that the African-American community on the south and west sides, although he said he lives downtown, he thinks that the African-American community will relate more to Farmer Darren Bailey from Louisville or Xenia, Illinois, 200-300 miles away, than it will to the billionaire J.B. Pritzker. That was the message.
So did he just do the short version of that for the commercial? Because he said none of that. Because if you say
this is just, I can trust this guy,
right? Because at least whether you agree with it or not, you can make the point. But in that commercial, none of that was there.
It's 30 seconds when the subtlety is lost.
Mike, have we seen anything like this before where a former reporter gets paid to endorse a candidate?
I haven't seen that. I mean, I've known Charles Thomas. I've always looked up to him, respected him, and I consider him a friend. And I still do, but he must have had his reasons to do that. But he just built a career of being a trusted reporter, and he's really jeopardizing all that. And the commercial I saw, I also see images of Ron Majors and Cheryl Burton. Did they ask to be in that ad? I don't know. So again, I'm sure he had his reasons to do it, but if he ever decides to go back, I thought it was actually announcing a radio talk show or something.
I wasn't sure where it was going.
I had to see it several times.
I said, but it's in the weekly news recap. It must be something.
Yes.
Well, he did have a radio talk show with Maze Jackson.
He had a radio talk show, but he also has launched a new radio talk show as well with Mark Wallace. So when you first watch it, you're like, oh, real talk. And he's,
real talk.
And then you just keep watching, and it's not what you think.
Well, listen, Kimberly, respond to this. We've got a comment here from Proud Chicagoan on YouTube. They say, I have no issues with the ads. Why is this a big deal?
For me, it's just the quality. I just, I'm looking at the commercials. They pay a lot of money for these commercials. And so I'm just trying to see, are they getting any type of message across? And I just think that was a miss. When you're listening to him and he says farmer like 5 times. We know the guy's a farmer. Yeah. And then he's like, yeah. Like, do you guys remember the commercial? Yeah, that's the ticket. That's what it felt like. It just felt just wrong. I don't know.
Well, it could be one of those things the person who wrote in, he doesn't have a problem with it. Maybe just from a journalist standpoint, somebody you looked up to who built that trust with the viewer. To to me, it just felt a little off-putting. But again, like Dan said, he's retired. He can do what he wants in his spare time.
Our YouTube viewer went on to say, I feel like a lot of former journalists move into paid posts for think tanks, etc. To further explain their point.
It's not unprecedented for a journalist to leave journalism and work for either party,
exactly,
or for any sort of advocacy group. So that's not really, I think, the issue here. It's like I said, it's his life. So he wants to do that. When we can argue about how effective it might be, or what it means for his legacy as a journalist, but.
Charles? Do you? Well, let's quickly turn to a race that isn't as high profile, but still very important. The candidates for Illinois Attorney General, they faced off in a virtual debate via Zoom. What did we learn from that debate, Dan?
The debate, how much are debates going to tell us at this point? There's a vast gap between the candidates, and people know what their positions are, and I think we know what most people in Illinois feel about these issues. So for me, I don't think it's going to change much.
Attorney General Kwame Raoul accused Republican challenger Thomas DeVore of making dangerous remarks, while DeVore accused Raoul of failing students by not challenging Pritzker's COVID restrictions. And they kind of went back and forth on that.
Well, that's DeVore's thing, that's been his thing, much like Darren Bailey from the start. So I think, that's consistent with his views. I don't know that that's tracked with the views of people in the state as a whole, as exhausted as people are with COVID and COVID restrictions. But that's what he came in to do. He was litigating together with Darren Bailey against what they say were unilateral moves by the state and by the governor primarily. And so this is what they're going to ride through November.
Yeah. We'll pick up the weekly news recap in just a moment with WVON's Kimberly Agoin, WBEZ's Mike Puente, and Dan Mihalopoulos. But first, let's check back in with Greta Johnson. Some aldermen worry the reduction of voting precincts in Chicago in the upcoming election will result in voter suppression.
Yes, thank you, Sasha. The Chicago Board of Elections is reducing the number of voting precincts by 40%. That's after a new state law required the change. The controversial move dominated much of the conversation at the board's annual budget hearing in front of a city council panel yesterday. But the city says while voting precincts are going down, actual physical locations where you can vote are only being cut by 10%. The Chicago Department of Public Health released a report in early October that shows new HIV and AIDS diagnoses are at their lowest points in the last 40 years. AIDS Foundation Chicago says those numbers may be skewed. The president of the group says the number of HIV test results reported to the department dropped by about 30% during the pandemic due to quarantines and lockdowns.
On this week's Wait, actor Jeremy Allen White, star of The Bear, denies that his character is in any way sexy.
No, Carmi does not have sex. Nobody has sex. The most kind of sexually charged moment on the show is between a character called Marcus and some donuts. There's no...
I'm Peter Sagal. I don't know. Sounds pretty hot to me. Join us for this week's news quiz from NPR. Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on WBEZ 91.5 FM.
WBEZ is supported by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois, committed to being a true partner by advancing and simplifying the healthcare experience for its members and communities. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois, through it all. WBEZ is also supported by Illinois Holocaust Museum, presenting Shim, Between Devastation and Resurrection, an exhibit of post-World War II photography by Magnum Photos co-founder David Seymour, ilholocaustmuseum.org. It is 51 degrees. We are looking at highs today in the upper 50s with partly sunny skies. Tonight, a chance of scattered showers with lows in the upper 30s. And Saturday and Sunday both call for sunny skies with highs in the low 50s, cooling down to around 40 overnight. Are you looking for fall hikes or maybe apple orchards? We have everything you need to live your best life before winter. You can find it at wbez.org/fall. It's 12:25. This is WBEZ.
Back now with more Reset. I'm your host, Sasha-Ann Simons. If you're just tuning in, we're going behind the headlines in our weekly news recap. But before the break, we took a deep dive into the governor's race and some candidate endorsements. But there's much more to get to.
Amazon warehouse workers in southwest suburban Joliet are planning to stage a walkout this afternoon. Workers are demanding better wages and a workplace free of injury and harassment.
Elective abortions are allowed in Indiana.
Websites for Chicago's Midway and O'Hare airports were taken offline today in a series of cyber attacks.
Columbus Day is alive and well on State Street.
With us is WVON commentator and attorney Kimberly Goen, WBEZ reporters Mike Puente and Dan Mihalopoulos. And a reminder, you can now watch the weekly news recap live on the WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. You can also leave us a comment or question, and I may just read what you have to say about these stories on the air. All right, over to you, Kimberly. Monday, for many, it was a day off of work, a day off of school, but Columbus Day, which is now also known as Indigenous Peoples Day, was not without controversy. What was going on in Chicago on Monday?
So, of course, we know that this harkens back to 2020 when there was a huge dispute in the wake of everything that happened with George Floyd and just a general awakening across the country where people wanted to take stock of who their heroes are and who they feel should be dethroned from those positions. Christopher Columbus, of course, the statues were removed because there was a major protest about that at that time. The mayor has always said that she felt that the statues probably would be returned. She has never been on record as saying that she wanted to get rid of Columbus Day, although there have been bills or ordinances in city council calling for that exact same thing and also to replace it with Indigenous Peoples Day. So on Indigenous People / Columbus Day, which we'll just call it all of that because I'm not sure what it is anymore. Yeah. On that day, there was a protest where actual members of the Indigenous community gathered, but it sounds like there are some fractions in even among that movement. So it ended up being kind of extremely loud, et cetera. And they were supposed to have a press conference that was shut down by some protesters. And so it ended up with a constituency led by Alderman Maria Haddon to have a discussion about Indigenous Peoples Day, kind of taken away from that large crowd, to just discuss why it's important to kind of move away from the colonization of this country and to respect the what she terms people of color.
Yeah. On Monday, Kimberly, in Lincoln Park, something very different was going on, also in connection with Indigenous Peoples Day.
So that's the larger event that I was
okay, gotcha.
Yes, that was the one that I was talking about.
So is this debate though over this holiday, right? We talked about not knowing what to call it at this point. Yeah. Is this something that your listeners at WVON are also calling?
Well, we've had
about?
the discussion, and we've actually had both sides on. So what you're looking at is people who are basically saying that Christopher Columbus should not be honored. We need to look at him and what his actual impact of him coming to the Americas was, millions dying, tribes wiped out, colonization, slave trade. But then also we've had people from the Italian American community, because they have chosen this man to be someone who they do put on hero status, and they continued with their parade as well. So it's when you talk about anytime taking something away from a community, you are going to have a real discussion about it before anything happens.
Yeah, I agree. Last year, President Biden, as we mentioned, issued the proclamation to observe Indigenous Peoples Day alongside Columbus Day. Several states have stopped celebrating Columbus Day altogether. Where does Illinois stand when it comes to this debate? Make it clear.
Well, in the state of Illinois, I know that there was a bill that was to try and take away Columbus Day. But right now we are recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day, but we're also recognizing Columbus Day. So I don't see, I don't know how the bill to just make it Indigenous Peoples Day stalled.
That was signed by Governor Rauner back in 2017. Yeah.
Yes, but to get rid of Columbus Day, which I'm talking about, for example, in the city of Chicago, that has stalled.
That's gone nowhere.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Dan, do you think that we are going to see any movement in Springfield?
Well, when you talk about whether there'll be any movement, as Kim said, you have to look at what are the groups that value each of these different designations. Yeah. And so on the one side, you have the Italian Americans, and they're a big group in Illinois. They are, I think, the third largest Italian American community, and they have a massive diaspora all over the world, but the third biggest population outside of New York and Philadelphia. And then when you talk about indigenous people, it's not just the tribes of the Midwest that have an interest here, I would argue. When you look at the huge Mexican-American community in Chicago, a lot of people in the Mexican-American community might view themselves, right, as a mestizaje, as a mix as La Raza is a mix of European heritage and indigenous people, such as the Aztecs and the Mayas. So,
and there's also a movement for
African.
There's an African-American movement as well to say that they are also indigenous.
And of course, Afro-Caribbean communities and many others who have some roots in the indigenous communities of the Americas as a whole, not just as the United States, which Columbus never came to. It's in and of itself what is now the United States. So it's, I think, two different groups that don't want to budge. And, why don't the Italians prefer someone else? A lot of them talk about, it was Catanzaro, another Italo-American, right. John Catanzaro, the head of the FOP, who complained that the Pope was not doing enough to support Columbus. I didn't realize that the head of the Fraternal Order of Police is infallible, but he wanted to trump the Pope on that one.
Well, Mike, how has Indiana handled this debate? I'm curious.
It's still officially the state holiday, Columbus Day, but in different parts of the state of Indiana, in sort of your more progressive areas like Indianapolis and college towns, West Lafayette, home of Purdue, and Indiana University in Bloomington, they also celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. And, I'm hoping that, one day we, far be it from me, I'm Mexican American, I can't tell another group of people who they should be celebrating, but perhaps we can come to a place where we can celebrate the Italian culture, because we all love it. We love the food. We love the culture. People love traveling to Italy, but perhaps not putting everything of the Italian culture on Columbus. Why not someone like Amerigo Vespucci, who America is named after, and he was an explorer in his own right. So again, I can't tell the Italian-American community who they should look up to, but at the same time, they have to recognize, and it's not across the border with Italians, of the tainted legacy that Columbus brings. And also this idea that there's also a pushback in telling, quote unquote, the real history of America in high schools and in grade schools. We have to tell that portion. And history has become so a political thing now that just teaching accuracy has become politics. If you don't have the whole story, how are you supposed to draw a conclusion?
Yeah. Well, Indiana may not be there yet, but more than 100 cities, including LA, Denver, Phoenix, and Seattle, have replaced Columbus with Indigenous Peoples Day. Chicago Public Schools has done that too, Kimberly. So, it does seem like there are some local ways that this can be done, even without this state bill passing.
I'm thinking that in those cities, there must not have been major pushback from the Italian-American civic leagues that you are seeing in the city of Chicago, because they are not letting this go. And it's similar to what Mike just said. How do you tell a group of people who they should decide to celebrate, and then also who should the substitute be? That's something that they have to come to their own conclusion organically.
Right.
However, the fact that the city of Chicago has seen fit, and people in the city of Chicago have seen fit to also raise their voices, that is what America is all about.
Mike, I'm going to get back to you and talk a bit more about Indiana politics for a moment. The state Supreme Court will be allowing abortions to continue for now.
Correct.
What's the latest?
Well, the latest is the Indiana Supreme Court is going to take this case. They're probably not going to hear it until January of sometime. So there's the ACLU was defending the Planned Parenthood in a ban on abortions in Indiana, where it bans pretty much every abortion with very few exceptions, rape, incest, the mother's life is at risk. But if it's like in a situation where rape or incest, you have to have it done within 10 weeks. That law was passed in a special session in August, and almost immediately after, almost a week after it went into effect in September, a lower court judge handed a stay on enforcing this new ban. So right now it's in the courts and in the hands of the courts. There's also another lawsuit that ACLU is handling that the ban also violates somebody's religious freedom, that under certain religions, abortion is allowed. So for right now, it's sort of the status quo in Indiana. And we'll see what happens in January or February when it comes down.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with WVON commentator and attorney Kimberly Agoin and WBEZ reporters Mike Puente and Dan Mihalopoulos. Sticking with you, Mike, efforts to unionize, that continues to gain momentum in our area and beyond. Workers at Amazon at a warehouse in Joliet, they've walked out. What are they asking for?
Well, I believe they're asking for collective bargaining rights. You have Amazon is growing by leaps and bounds, and we see the ads for workers out there, but we also hear complaints about working conditions, working hours, not having enough sick time and vacation time, and just...
And what looks like outright racism here. Black employees have said that there's a hostile work environment, including employees wearing Confederate flags.
That's right. So collective bargaining could be an effort to have protections for workers. Illinois is a very strong union state, at least the Chicagoland area is, and we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah. Field Museum employees have also expressed their intent to unionize. What's the latest there, Mike?
That I'm not as familiar with, so maybe Dan knows a little bit about that. I'll put you to you, Dan.
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of unionization. Field Museum employees want to unionize. We've seen unionization in Starbucks and some of them. We've seen
What are your thoughts on whether
coffee.
these might be successful?
Yeah, they're increasingly successful. I mean, I think we've had some reports recently that there are far more efforts to get certified relative to other years. I think we had some reports coming out on Labor Day here at WBEZ on how unionization is increasing after many, many decades of decline. And it does have an impact. There was another study that just came out that says a person who's in a union makes an average of $1.3 million more than a non-union person over the course of their and to full disclosure, we're members of SAG-AFTRA. Mike and I know, and the rank and file here, here at WBEZ. So we should just agree to contract a short time ago, a few months ago, for 3 or 4 years. So I think that there's a lot more unionization going on, and I think that's a pendulum that's swinging back, although the numbers have gone down so much. I don't know that the pendulum swings all the way back.
I'm just wondering, is there, though, going to be any backlash to shutting down actual stores because people say that they want to form a union? That just seems a little...
You mean Amazon? Are you referring to?
No, I was thinking about Starbucks. So that was the latest one, and they're shut. The people, I think, at the Bryn Mawr location of Starbucks, they have shown an interest and already filed, an interest to unionize there. And now the word is that they're shutting the store down.
Well, management does have that power, and I think we have seen that in other areas, including in the media when, remember, DNA Info unionized a few years ago, and the billionaire owner said, well, I'm taking the ball, I'm going home.
But it isn't just retail workers and Amazon workers. We're also seeing pushback with airline pilots and stewardesses, flight attendants. They have pushed back on some of the demands of the airlines, and they have walked out or staged informational picketing. And as we see with downsizing of certain companies and asking workers to work longer hours, it just makes sense. And we can't forget about teachers unionizing or in unions. It's a big issue in Indiana where teachers' pay has been a huge hot button issue with workers walking out or staging huge big rallies in Indianapolis.
I'm teachers' pay deserves to continue to be a hot button issue.
Right.
That's right.
If we're being honest.
Collective bargaining, union rights, unionization, it's something that is not going to go away.
Which is why it's an amendment that's going to be on all of our ballots in November.
Yes.
The Workers' Rights Amendment.
Angela, our friend on YouTube, says, I saw Starbucks was closing their unionized Edgewater store. She says, I suppose the Field Museum can't just close for that, though.
Oh, good point.
Right? Well, Mike brings up flight attendants and pilots. I want to close this segment of the recap with a story that we might have missed, Kimberly.
Oh, yeah.
A cyber attack on O'Hare and Midway's websites.
So according to the airports, and of course, we're talking about air travel. I'm the worst flyer in the world. And I used to work for the airports. Terrible flyer.
What do you mean?
Just
you're scared?
Nervous about flying.
Okay.
It's not my thing, but you have to do it, right?
Yes.
So imagine you're going to get your flight and all of a sudden all the websites are down. Well, that's going to put in your mind, well, what else is going on with the security? But we have been assured that at Midway and O'Hare and also LaGuardia, this impacted several airports around the country. According to news, they were Russian hackers. KillNet is the name of the organization that is taking credit for it. And they wanted to create chaos and confusion. And I think that they did to a certain degree because it's kind of a little scary because you're wondering where is the line between just having your website confused, but having planes confused or having air traffic controller confused.
Yeah,
I was affected by it Monday morning.
Okay.
I flew from O'Hare to LaGuardia on Monday to, pick up a couple Edward R. Murrow awards for WBEZ in Manhattan. Thank you very much. And
toot, toot.
I overslept my Uber at like 5 in the morning, 4:45 a.m. and ended up trying to look on my phone for parking. And, because I don't know, how much do they charge us depending on which lot you're in.
Right.
And I found out it's $46 a day.
Oh, no.
But,
a day?
Jeez. Yeah. For if you're up close by the terminal. And I did make it to the gate 16 minutes to spare. But the website was down and I couldn't figure it out. The only other thing I remember happening like this, I tried to look up campaign contributions on the Illinois State Board of Elections a year or two ago. They were hit by Russian hackers as well. So I think we might as well get used to it as long as they are losing in Ukraine, which they are. They're going to do what they can do to strike back at the people that they think are supporting Ukraine.
And it isn't just airlines. You have to be careful. I know sometimes they try to go after utilities, public utilities, railroads. So these type of hacking isn't uncommon. They got to be ready for it. And especially like Dan was saying, we're in this heightened sense of security right now because of what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, thank God for this. Airport operations and safety were not impacted. We'll pick up the weekly news recap in just a moment with WVON's Kimberly Agoin and WBEZ's Mike Puente and Dan Mihalopoulos. But first, Greta will tell us about how President Joe Biden is touting his administration's efforts to reduce inflation and drive down costs.
Yes, thank you, Sasha. President Biden is speaking with older Americans in Irvine, California today. The visit comes on the heels of an announcement that millions of Social Security recipients will get an 8.7% boost in their benefits in 2023. It's a historic increase, but a gain that'll be eaten up in part by the rising cost of everyday living. President Biden is expected to sign an executive order to push for lower prescription drug costs as well. And the Chicago City Council Latino Caucus is demanding the city declare a state of emergency to protect migrants arriving in Chicago from other states. So far this year, more than 2,900 migrants have been sent to the city on buses. Mayor Lori Lightfoot says the city is collaborating with the state of Illinois and Cook County to provide for the migrants' needs. Governor J.B. Pritzker declared a state of emergency in September over the crisis.
On the next Science Friday, it's not an IPA or a lager, it's an old-style beer, the Gruit. And the key ingredient is mugwort, an invasive species.
It's really good at being a plant. It's really good at being a weedy plant. Doesn't need a lot of love, doesn't need a lot of attention. It'll grow on the roadside, it'll grow in the subway crack.
We'll taste a beer made with backyard ingredients on Science Friday from WNYC Studio.
That's this afternoon at 1 o'clock on WBEZ Chicago.
Today's programming on WBEZ is dedicated to our daughter Nora and her fiancé Ben. Let the audience for WBEZ expand forever from Jesse Hall and Barbara Engel.
More and more listeners are giving, and many of you just gave for the first time. We are truly grateful for your support. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving. WBEZ is here thanks to you.
WBEZ is supported by listeners like you and by Chicago Shakespeare Theater presenting The Notebook on stage now. Chicago Tribune calls this world premiere musical absolutely gorgeous, not to be missed. Tickets at chicagoshakes.com. WBEZ is also supported by Roosevelt University in partnership with Just the Beginning, a pipeline organization presenting a conversation with Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor live at the Auditorium on October 20th. Tickets at auditoriumtheater.org. Support for WBEZ also comes from the Music Institute of Chicago, presenting the Latin Grammy Award-winning Quarteto Latino Americano Saturday, October 15th at Nichols Concert Hall in downtown Evanston. Tickets at nicholsconcerthall.org. A mix of sun and clouds today with highs in the upper 50s. It is 55 degrees at 12:45.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we are back with more of our weekly news recap. With us is WVON commentator and attorney Kimberly Agoin, WBEZ reporter Mike Puente, and WBEZ investigative reporter Dan Mihalopoulos. We are still live on the WBEZ Facebook and YouTube pages. Wave hi, everyone. So, more than 40,000 runners descended on Grant Park last Sunday for the Chicago Marathon. So our next story, folks, it has to do with somebody in this room. I'm looking at you, Mike. You were one of those 40,000 runners. Set the scene. What happened? What was it like?
Oh, it was great. I mean, kind of now that I survived it, but the night before I didn't sleep. I've been training, I've been doing stuff, but the day came and they told you're probably not going to sleep the night before, so I was running late, but I got into my what they call corrals. I was in the last corral, the end corral, and it was just an amazing experience. Just going through the neighborhood, seeing all the signs, the fans, the crew that puts it together, all the runners from all around the world, from the Kenyan runners who are just fabulous to professionals to just everyday folks, and in all colors, all ages, all different levels of fitness.
Yeah. Well, here there was a new division added to the race this year as well. What are the details there?
The details are there was a non-binary division where for non-binary folks. But even with that, there was a little bit of controversy. From my understanding is that there wasn't an elite division for that. And there wasn't really a big announcement of it.
Yeah, it wasn't well advertised from what I hear.
But at least now people know about it for the future. And, if they're in that category, they can run, they can feel comfortable, and perhaps in the future they'll have an elite category. Yeah. Whatever elite category that I'm not in that elite category.
You're not in the elite.
No.
Well, there were 70 non-binary racers in this year's marathon, which is incredible. Right. You're wearing is that your medal?
That's the hardware.
That's
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Running, crawling, rolling to the finish line.
You crawled. What's your time?
It was after 6 hours, but I got there.
That's amazing. So, Mike, I'm so proud of you.
The first person who ran that race died, so I admire anyone who crosses the finish line.
Kimberly, way to kill the mood.
Well, it would have been probably better my time. I stopped at porta potties 4 or 5 times in the first hour.
You did what you had to do.
A lot of fluids.
Both the men's and women's winners were from Kenya, right?
I believe so. It seems like they're always the elite runners, but they train for it. They're in a high altitude. A lot of people say it's just because of genetics or whatever, but they train. I've been studying them, and they do a lot of amazing things. But they're running, 4-minute miles. That's something that's almost superhuman.
But let's not forget the wheelchair event.
Oh yeah,
because the University of Illinois, ILL, they have got the monopoly on training in the wheel. I mean, they've been doing this for like 50 years. And both the male and the female in the wheelchair event who both won were both trained at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Oh. And that happens every year.
Now, are you taking part in any of these marathons, Kimberly?
Absolutely not.
No way.
Was this your first one, Mike?
My first one, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to try to run more. But even if you don't run, it's really the neighborhoods that you go through. They make it special. Even the workers passing out, handing out water and Gatorade. And
so are people just out and along the sidelines just cheering you on?
Cheering, with signs.
Oh, that's awesome.
And on my shirt, I had Mike on there. So people were like, Mike, oh, Mike.
I love it.
So it really is a celebration of Chicago. So if I never run it again, I definitely plan to volunteer because they really put on. All the runners say this is one of the best marathons anywhere. I was supposed to run with my niece. She's running in Miami, and Miami's nothing like.
Yeah, a lot of people travel here.
They travel here, and it's really talked up. It's really a great experience.
Well, I have good news for you. Dan told me earlier that he's running with you next year.
Oh, come on, Dan. We can do it. We're going to try to put together a WBEZ running team. We can do it.
30 years and 50 pounds ago, I could run a mile in about 5 minutes.
You're very competitive.
I'm
so
gonna stress fractures, man.
if WBBM gets a marathon team, we got to beat them.
I won't be on it.
So as we move toward the finish line in our news recap, like that?
I like that.
The MacArthur Foundation announced the 25 winners of what's known as the Genius Grant. It includes 3 Chicagoans. Tell us a little bit about them, Kimberly.
Very excited about this. First of all, the grant, you get $800,000 unrestricted, where you can use it in any way, shape. They just want to encourage your genius. I want to be a genius over 5 years. And the 3 people are very talented from Chicago. One is a musician, and they're just saying she's doing just amazing things with her cello and just broadening the horizons of people in music. The other is dealing with race and the impact in Chicago, in communities of color, and just having that discussion. And the third one is one that I know personally. She's a graduate of the University of Chicago Laboratory School, Amanda Williams, who has been an artist at the forefront of her medium, in which she meets at the intersection of race, art, color, community, just has done so many fabulous things. As a matter of fact, is working on the Obama Library. One of the people who's working on the interior design of the Obama Library.
Geniuses. That cellist you were talking about, Tamika Reed, and Reuben Jonathan Miller is that sociologist working on the impact of incarceration on individuals and their families. Great work. While we're recognizing awards for genius, another one went to the University of Chicago this week. Douglas Diamond. He became the university's 33rd economist to win the prestigious Nobel Prize. Diamond shared his initial reaction. Let's listen.
I was sound asleep, so my main reaction was trying to figure out where my phone was. So I heard this Swedish voice on there saying, "Are you Professor Doug Diamond, blah, 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 blah." I said, yes. And I did know this was the day that they announced the prize. And I thought it was probably legit, but you never know. I have some friends with good sense of humor.
Diamond's considered one of the world's foremost minds regarding the banking industry, and he won for his influential research on the banking system. So congratulations, Douglas Diamond, and to the University of Chicago as well. This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. If you are just tuning in, we're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with WVON commentator and attorney Kimberly Agoin and WBEZ reporters Mike Puente and Dan Mihalopoulos. All right, we're going to check out some news about a supermarket Megamerger. I don't know if you folks heard this story. Mariano's parent company, Kroger, is actually buying the parent company of Jewel. That's Albertsons. We don't know yet how that might impact the 2 grocery giants, but is anyone worried about the end of Cheap Chicken Mondays? My colleagues here on the Reset team, they're shaking in their boots. This is a real thing. We've got to know.
They even have T-shirts for that.
For Cheap Chicken Mondays?
Yes, the people who work there.
I must know more, please.
They do.
What?
I think people are in general just concerned about the price of food. When you're talking about these 2, Jewel and Mariano's, both fabulous stores, but at very different price points. So the idea that they're going to come together, it's a little unnerving.
Yeah. Our earlier guests on the program, Brandon Pope, was like, just don't touch my Cheap Chicken Mondays when he heard the news. What do you think, Dan?
Less competition usually, although some readers write in and say, oh, you journalists are communists and socialists. My understanding of capitalism is less competition is not going to result in lower prices. We already have inflation and, double digits percentage-wise. So I personally, I grew up with in a Dominick's family.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dominick's.
That's another popular opinion on the Reset team.
Right. They're also long gone. The other thing I like to do, and I don't have any interest in any of these grocery stores, but I also grew up a lot with kind of ethnic type groceries, like like a Fresh Farms or something like that. I can think of in Niles. There seem to be fewer and fewer of those. Some people like to buy things from some of those places because I'm told that sometimes it's cheaper than the big chains because they get produce that is about to, get to the end of its lifespan. But if you can go to the store more often, that could be more economical.
Right.
And if you go to these kind of ethnic type markets where I prefer to get produce, fruits, and some other and coffee and things like that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Quick story here before we start to wrap. A new national museum highlighting public housing, that's soon going to break ground. Tell us a little bit about the National Public Housing Museum.
So excited about this. We had the vice chairman of the board for the National Public Housing Museum on. Her name is Crystal Palmer, and also Reverend Marshall Hatch. They were both there for the groundbreaking. This is a museum that has been years in the making, and it should come to fruition by next year. And it's just discussing that real evolution of public housing, trying to break down some of the stereotypes and give the true story behind it. But also in Chicago, it's going to represent the whole nation. But it's really interesting this in Chicago because some of the biggest movements, political movements, have come out of organizing around public housing rights. Marion Stamps, who was an amazing force of nature, was one of the people who led that. And that kind of morphed into the whole fight to get Harold Washington to be mayor of the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
So that museum should be a wonderful asset to the city of Chicago.
The idea is that it will break some of the stereotypes that might be out there.
That's right, about what people think of when they think of public housing.
Where exactly is it going to be located?
I don't remember the exact address. I just know that they definitely had groundbreaking.
Yeah, and it's much needed.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as we look ahead to next week, I'm curious what you guys are going to be keeping your eyes on. You want to go first, Kimberly?
Sure. We're still waiting for some more people to drop their name into the mayoral race. That's something that's going to be we're going to be on the watch for that. And then also there's a new organization called Black Women Who Lead that just got its start on Indigenous People Columbus Day, just discussing how Black women are tired of having symbolic representation and want to have more power.
That's a good one. What about you, Dan?
Well, on the government and politics team here at WBEZ, and certainly our counterparts in the same beat at the Sun-Times and our competitors, we're all looking at one election at a time, Kimberly. First one next month, what sort of things the candidates are saying for governor, senator, Congress, statewide offices that are all on the ballot next month. And the other thing we'll be also looking at, going back to the start of the program, is this expanded Madigan case. And there's, I think, arraignment for AT&T next week.
For sure. Mike, what's on your radar?
Well, I'm going to be paying attention on the Indiana side to this, the one and only debate between U.S. Senate Republican incumbent Todd Young and Tom McDermott Jr. He's a Democrat. Now, normally Republicans have a free reign in Indiana, but this is a race that is tightening and is going to play a role in the control of the U.S. Senate. So it's a race that is really tightening. They have their only debate this Sunday in Indianapolis. I'm going to be watching for that.
My thanks to WBEZ's Mike Puente and Dan Mihalopoulos and WVON's Kimberly Agoin. Thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
That's it for Reset. The show is produced by Meha Ahmed, Haima De Medici, Linnea Dominic, Brenda Ruiz, Micah Yason, Claire Hyman, Michael Liptrot, Andrea Guthman, Char Daston, and Andrew Merriweather. Dan Tucker's our executive producer. Ethan Schwab is our engineer. Monday on the show, it feels like every day brings a new type of scam that we need to worry about. The latest hitting the Chicago area is, of course, scammers stealing checks from mailboxes, washing off the ink, rewriting them to steal thousands of dollars. So we'll explain and we'll talk best practices for staying safe. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. My WBEZ colleague Susie Ahn will guest host the show on Monday and Tuesday, while I work on some special projects and conduct interviews that you will get to hear very soon. Thank you so much for listening and have a great weekend. We'll meet again soon.